Hello, welcome everyone to another episode of the Virtual Ninja Show. My name is Heike, and today I have two experts again with me. We are going to talk about RDP Telemetry in Defender XDR. And I start with Danielle. Please introduce yourself.
Hi everyone, I'm very excited to be here today. I'm a researcher in MDE in Microsoft, and I want to talk about the telemetry we've recently added to the product and to show you what you can do with it and how much security value it can bring you.
Yes, thank you. And then we have Saar. Please introduce yourself.
Hi everyone, excited to be here. I'm Saar, a product manager in Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. I own and lead the domain of data and telemetry, and as part of it, I developed together with Danielle this new RDP telemetry that we would like to introduce today.
Wonderful. And I think, RDP is nothing new, right? It's the remote desktop protocol. For everyone who doesn't know, does one of you quickly want to explain what it's used for?
Yeah, definitely. So RDP is definitely not something new. It's been there for decades. It's a Microsoft protocol designed to provide remote display and input capabilities over network connections. And it's a very common tool also for remote work, but also for administration and troubleshooting scenarios. And it is widely used among customers and users, regardless of cybersecurity. The reason why it is important for our discussion is because it is also commonly used by attackers to invade organizations and to do
bad things.
do their things, attack the organizations and do everything that they like, the bad stuff that we would like to stop them from doing. So that is why we are concerned with that, and we would like to emphasize more.
So I think I asked Danielle, coming out of the research world, like, what are these attacks? What are you seeing when you think about RDP attacks? Like, how are they being used?
Sure. So RDP is commonly used by attackers, as Saar mentioned. We have a very large research team that all it does is to track the threat landscape and understand the attackers' behaviors. And we've noticed that during ransomware attacks and nation-state attacks, attackers use it as a key feature, both for initial access. They use it for phishing. They use it for RDP brute force. Mm-hmm. They try to log in numerous times to internet-facing assets they find for interesting networks. And also they use it for lateral movements, to move laterally between assets in the network and to get themselves into the more interesting assets, like the domain controller, the email servers, the DNS servers, or other key servers in the network. And the last thing we have recently seen rising in the threat landscape is using RDP for impact stage, mostly in ransomware attack. We see that attackers are opening multiple RDP sessions to victim computers and try to encrypt them over RDP, or they move the ransomware payload over the RDP session to the victim computer.
Even for the hackers, it's easier to do it with a graphical user interface, right? So, what else is there more beautiful than a remote desktop session and basically see a mouse, see the entire desktop and, find what you need. And then how do they lure? Like, they send someone like an RDP config file, basically the file that then initiates the RDP connection, or what are these kind of RDP phishing attacks?
So sometimes we see a regular phishing attack, like an email or sometimes even a phone or other way to lure the victim. And then they get the password from the user itself and connect through RDP. Another more interesting and unusual case that we saw is an attack performed by Midnight Blizzard, a very serious and respected, actor. And then they sent the RDP config files as a phishing file in an email.
So, and then given we have, these attackers out there, so what has been added? What are we sharing here?
Okay, so since Microsoft really highlighted this, the importance of RDP and RDP telemetry, first to allow Microsoft to provide better protection coverage for our customers, and also to allow customers to enhance their signal and custom detections against these tactics and techniques. In the past, we had more limited implementation for RDP telemetry. So if a customer wanted to understand if something happened in an RDP state, they needed to correlate multiple tables, for instance, the user or login table together with the device process table. What we have just implemented is the RDP session information within the process entity, which means that we can now tell more specifically and in higher fidelity about a specific process, what is the state of execution that it has been executed. So basically, like, we can tell if the process was executed in a remote session state or not, like if it was an ordinary, let's say, regular session state or a remote one. But we can also tell about the session itself. We can tell the desktop name that it came from. We can tell the IP that it came from. So if you look at the new columns that we introduced, we can tell exactly these. We can tell the device name, the IP that the RDP came from, and we can definitely tell if it's an RDP state or not. So these are basically the additions that we had, and we incorporated it into both our backend detection engine and logic, and that is often ML based and heuristics, and like we implement many logics to support our customers and also to allow our customers to create their own custom detections to leverage these capabilities.
Mm-hmm. So, Saar, I know that we added now new additional events to the tables. Can you elaborate a little bit on what these are and where they can be found?
Yes, definitely. So simply, we have 4 new columns. One column is for the session ID, so the remote session ID. This is an identifier that is coupled with the remote session itself. The second column that we have is a Boolean saying if the state of the process is a remote state or not. So regular session versus remote session. So it's really a binary, true, false, representing the remote state of the execution. And the other two are about the device that initiated the remote desktop connection, which is the device name and the IP. So the customers can tell, and even we can tell, where the RDP session came from, what was the device that initiated the connection, and what is the IP that we've observed during the process. So these 4 columns are then expanded to 8 columns in specific tables if we represent both the created process and the initiating process. So it is unique to device process events and device events for specific action types, where we have both the initiating process and the created process. For other tables and other events, this is not relevant because the created process is not an outcome of these action types. So that's why some tables are expanded in 8 columns and other are 4. But basically, these are the 4 columns in relation to the process entity itself.
What do you mean by 4 when I see 8?
Yeah, so 8, like I said, it's 4 multiplied by 2, because sometimes we have both the context of the created process and the initiating process.
Oh, okay. I looked at the table names, but that was not even. Okay, now you have in the device events, you have something for initiating process and created process. In device process events, something for initiating process and created process. And then for device file events, device image load events, device logon events, device network events, and device registry events, it doesn't make any sense to have created process, but we have the initiating process in there.
That's correct, because the outcome of the action is something else. For instance, registry value set or file creation, which is for process activity, it's the creation of the process. So that is unique to activities where the outcome of the activity is a actual process creation. That's the reason why. Yeah.
Cool. So, Saar, earlier you mentioned that it was possible before to find some of these events already, but now we made it easier. Do you want to show how it looks like now?
Yes, definitely. So it's important to mention that it's not only easier, but also in higher fidelity, because in the past we could correlate um, to activities and say that in very, very high certainty, these are correlated, right? So this is the account that really initiated the process. But now we can tell more specifically because we incorporated the remote session information to the process entity itself. So looking at the query above, we can see that in the past, if we wanted to query remote interactive activity that is initiated by a specific account, you can see that we are joining two tables here. We have the device process event, which contains the information about what has been executed. So specifically here, we are looking for tampering attempt. So you can see the disable real-time monitoring and the set MP preference. So these are commands which in high certainty indicates about a tampering attempt. So if we wanted to understand where it comes from and what was the account that initiated it, we needed to join it with the device logon events on the initiating process account seed or any other unique identifier to really do that. But now we can do that directly from device process events, regardless of the device logon events, because we can now tell on the process entity itself if the process is executed in a remote session state. So as you can see here, the file name is exactly the same, the command line is exactly the same, but now instead of joining the device logon events and querying on the logon type remote interactive, we can just tell is initiating process remote session, and this gives us a very precise and high fidelity answer to the question if this process was initiated by a remote actor.
I would like to add something here. Like Sarah said, we needed to join two tables, but not only that we needed to join them, we also couldn't tell for in certainty that the logon event that was a remote interactive is actually part of the process. We couldn't say it's the same execution. It was like correlation based on the user, but not necessarily things were executed at the same time. And it's possible that the remote session was before or after the execution.
Mm-hmm. So you added, of course, all these additional events that give us as well as the security analyst more certainty. How are we leveraging the telemetry from an alert perspective as well as attack disruption? And how can someone sitting in front of the portal leverage that new telemetry?
So it's a great question. I love it. First of all, we use it a lot in our detection logics in our research team. It feeds the ML models that our ML team is creating, and it also creates behavioral detections. We see often that during RDP sessions, many malicious things happens, and we, based on some of these detections, enabling of automatic attack disruption. If the level of certainty is high enough and we feel very confident that this is a malicious RDP session, then we enable attack disruption.
Mm-hmm.
So this is like how we use it. Additionally, there are many ideas that can be used by SOC analysts and security admins. We have some ideas for threat hunting, for posture improvements. Do you want me to deep dive into them?
Yes.
First of all, we can find all the malicious activities under a specific RDP session. For example, if we already identified a specific user that is doing some trouble in the network, and never mind how we got to it, we can query each of the tables that we mentioned before. We can specify the account, and we can specify that we want the session to be remote, and then we can see all the processes executed, or all the registry that was edited, and anything malicious that the user did.
Mm-hmm.
Saar, do you want to show the relevant queries?
Yeah, so I can write it. But for device process events, for instance, where is initiating process remote session is true, and we know about the specific account name, or for instance, the account seed, we can then see the activity, and even, for instance, if we have a specific timestamp that we know the actions were taken or the malicious activity has been triggered, we can then see the activities that the user is activated.
And then you mentioned posture management, Danielle. So how can someone use that there?
So for posture, we can have this new feature as an exploration feature. We can see, for example, all the IPs and the host names that connect with RDP to our network. That can help us identify anomalous patterns. For example, if all the host names in our network are beginning with PC and certain number after it, and then suddenly we see different name like computer ABCD. Then it pops out as something very anomalous. Sometimes it's even more strange names, then it really helps to identify it. Other than that, we can search for internet IPs that are connecting to our assets and not an internal network IPs.
Danielle, I think for that we have prepared a great example here. For the RDP brute force, for instance, which is a very common use case that we see attackers doing, we can see that now we create the device logon events table. We're looking for logon failures because this is the best indicator for RDP brute force. Because usually for brute force, the attacker does not succeed in the first time, like in the first attempt. So even going very simple, we can just query the logon failures together with initiating process remote session when it is true, and then we can get more information about these brute force attempts. But like Danielle mentioned, it's even more interesting to correlate this information with internet-facing devices. So if we take this very simple query and then we correlate it or join it with the device info information, we can narrow down the research or the investigation into internet-facing devices, which we know that are more vulnerable to attacks, because usually for the attacker, it's much easier to invade the network when attacking internet-facing devices. Mm-hmm. So we can query this information using the device info table and get the internet-facing reason, which usually it's public scan, but sometimes it's a better indicator. And we can see the last time that the device interacted with the internet as well as the public IP. So these are very good indicators that enhances our visibility to RDP brute force and sometimes correlate these activities to malicious public IP or common threat actors or groups, etc., which makes much more sense when we investigate such cases.
Thank you, Danielle. So for the posture improvements and for finding all the internal facing high valuable assets, mail, domain controller, I still need to use advanced hunting to do this, or do we have some nice, I don't know, posture picture, or can I use Security Copilot to help me with that?
So we have the device inventory, so you can use this for finding your relevant assets. I cannot speak enough for how posture is important and how in many cases that we investigate ransomware attacks that cause severe damage to our customers, the posture is not good. And if we can use these queries and other tools that our XDR offers to improve our posture, that will reduce the attack surface and reduce the chances to be hit by such severe activities and severe attacks.
I'd like to add something. Very commonly we see, like Danielle explained, the combination of CVEs or bad postures in organization together with these remote desktop activities. And when correlated, these are very good indicators that something bad is happening in the network, and also allows customers to really improve their posture to avoid this in the future.
So what are some, and you know, I say this all the time when we talk about advanced hunting, because my favorite feature is still custom detections that people can create to then get alerts and response actions automatically based on their own queries. What are some good examples that our audience can grab from you and turn into custom detections for their own?
So I think with very little modification, the customer can really take such examples and create custom detections based on what they see. Another example would be remote session logins to high value assets. So a customer can even create custom detections saying, if I see this and that remote sessions or unknown or infrequent user logging into my DC or to another value asset, so you can trigger custom detection or alert based on this custom detection. Usually this is very specific to organization. It fits very good for custom detections because custom detection usually leverages the knowledge of the analyst or the threat hunter of the organization, which is something that it's more difficult for us to do because we need to scale to a worldwide population usually.
So these are great. And then I think we showed two other examples before, RDP Bruce Force, and then the other one was tampering attempts. And we share all of these, of course, with our audience. So we have the fields now named as remote, but it refers only to RDP. Why is that?
We understand that changes in advanced hunting schema are very difficult to our customers, and we acknowledge that. We try as much as possible to avoid these, and when we need to commit changes to the advanced hunting schema, we usually initiate admin center messages, etc. So it's a difficult process, and we would like to avoid that because we know, we mentioned before custom detection, so custom detections requires really, it is relied on the schema itself. We're really taking that into our consideration, and this is something we would like to avoid at all costs, as long as we can.
Yeah.
In this specific use case, this is the stream of consciousness. Because we want to avoid primary breaking change in the schema, we strike the balance with the most precise naming of a column, which would be RDP in that case, but also something that is more generic that allows us to expand and to extend it in the future. So as we plan to include more protocols such as SMBs and others, we chose this design choice to allow us room for expansion.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. You don't want to interrupt something that already works for many customers. And we know our customers often don't see the message center and then it breaks and so on. So let's not touch it.
Just another thing about that, if we want to add more protocols in the futures, we can add additional column that states which protocol is it. So this solution was generic enough. I think it's clarified now by this show and also in the documentation.
Okay, and then we want to quickly show you a short video on how attack disruption actually reacts up on really certain high certainty that something malicious is happening, and then suddenly that RDP connection is interrupted. Let's roll the video. You can see an RDP session initiated and then a PowerShell file named encryptor copied to that machine. The file runs and it starts encrypting files. After a few seconds, attack disruption interrupts that RDP session. The attacker tries again, but without success. So what in this video telemetry basically gave us that certainty to kick in with attack disruption?
So we saw an attacker that is leveraging the RDP for dropping a ransomware payload on a victim device and starting the encryption. Mm-hmm. And this is actually the best evidence for a malicious activity. That's why we contain the user and log off the RDP session. So you won't be able to reinitiate the session and continue the encryption. We can minimize the damage and we can stop encryption on other devices by the same user.
Yeah. And for everyone out there, you don't have to do anything. It's on by default and it will just work in case you experience something like that, which I don't hope. So,
and if you want to learn more about that, we've just had a very good session in the last Ignite. So you can learn more about attack disruption and specifically about RDP, log off and user containment.
Yes, that's a beautiful hint. So we will put a link to that Ignite session. And so I think we covered all. Super exciting. I remember when you reached out and I was like, yes, we want to learn more about this. So thank you. And I hope I will have you two back one time again to talk about additional telemetry that you bring for our users. And until then, thank you. And thanks everyone for watching. Talk soon. Bye.